In the vastness of the galaxy, countless civilizations had risen, flourished, and stagnated, all bound by the universal truth that survival was the highest instinct. Among them were species that had conquered time itself, stretching their lives to spans that seemed eternal. To them, death was the great enemy, a looming shadow they had built their entire cultures around avoiding. They worshipped longevity, cherished safety, and measured progress not by daring feats, but by how much longer they could cling to existence. It was in this galaxy of fear that humanity appeared, a species that should have been dismissed as fragile and short-lived, and yet drew the gaze of empires too ancient to remember their own origins. When humans were first encountered, they were seen as curious anomalies. Their bodies aged quickly, their lifespans measured in mere decades compared to the centuries of others. Their homeworld was violent, their history chaotic, and yet they spread with determination. The aliens watching could not comprehend it. Short lives should breed caution, but instead humanity rushed headlong into the stars. To study them became a fascination, and soon experiments began, not out of cruelty at first, but curiosity. What made this species burn so brightly when every logic said they should be meek? In a cold chamber aboard a colossal station orbiting a dead sun, a group of alien observers gathered around a transparent barrier. Inside, human prisoners sat quietly. The aliens expected begging, fear, desperation to cling to life, but what they saw unsettled them. The humans were calm. Some spoke softly to one another, some even smiled. One soldier whispered prayers, another laughed at a private joke. They should have been terrified, yet their eyes carried something else entirely, a steady acceptance. The first test was simple. Oxygen levels were lowered slowly, creating a creeping suffocation. For any other species, panic would erupt within moments. Clawing, shrieking, desperate gasps, these were the normal responses. But the humans endured. Their breathing grew heavy, their faces strained, yet they did not beg. One soldier, noticing another faltering, pushed his own oxygen mask onto his comrade's face, sacrificing himself without hesitation. He slumped, gasping, eyes closing, but with a faint smile. The chamber erupted not with chaos, but with silence, the kind of silence that chills even the most clinical observer. The aliens exchanged murmurs. Sacrifice was not unheard of in the galaxy, but it was always a last resort, born of despair. This act was different. This human had chosen death freely, as if it carried meaning beyond survival. The observers noted every detail, unsettled by what they could not quantify. They brought the humans food laced with toxins, a test of survival instincts. The humans recognized the trap, but rather than turn on one another, they shared what little safe food they had, ensuring even the weakest among them ate first. When one died from the poison portion, the others held him, speaking softly, not cursing their captors but honoring the fallen. The aliens watched, expecting outrage, yet finding unity. There was no fear of the end, only acceptance and a strange reverence. Alien scholars studied the archives of humanity, dissecting their history. Wars spanning centuries, explorers crossing oceans knowing they might never return, astronauts launching into the void on fragile machines. They read of humans who walked willingly into fire, soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save comrades, doctors who stayed in plague zones to heal others until their own bodies failed. Again and again, across their short, brutal history, humans chose death not as defeat but as defiance, as meaning. One alien scientist presented his findings before the council. "They do not fear the end," he said. "They plan for it, sing about it, build monuments to it. Their myths glorify sacrifice. Their philosophies embrace mortality as the price of purpose. We seek to escape death, but they seek to master it." The council dismissed him at first, for such an idea was impossible. Yet the experiments continued and the evidence mounted. Among the prisoners was a commander, though his rank mattered little in captivity. He spoke often, not to his captors but to his fellow humans. "We all die," he reminded them. "What matters is what we do before it. Death is not the enemy, It is the proof that we lived. The aliens recorded his words, attempting to analyze them. To beings who clung to life with desperation, the notion was incomprehensible. How could death be anything but loss? How could acceptance breed strength? Another test was devised. The humans were told only one would survive if the others perished. It was expected they would fight, betray, and scramble to live. Instead, each offered themselves, refusing to choose another for death. They argued not to save their lives but to give them up for others. To the aliens it was madness. To the humans it was honor. One finally stepped forward, declaring, "Let me go, I have lived enough. Let another carry on." He walked calmly into the execution chamber. The others stood silently, some with tears, some with smiles, not broken but proud. The council of aliens grew restless. Fear began to creep into their voices. These humans were wrong, they said. They were dangerous. A species that did not fear death could not be controlled, could not be conquered. For every threat relied upon fear of the end, and if death was no threat at all, what weapon remained? In the sterile observation deck, alien scientists debated late into their endless nights. They dissected human psychology, examined brain scans, replayed every act of defiance. They wanted to reduce it to numbers, but the numbers betrayed them. They saw patterns of courage, self-sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. They saw meaning where there should have been only instinct. And most unsettling of all, they saw themselves reflected, for somewhere deep within, even they had once known bravery before their civilizations had calcified around fear. The commander, speaking softly one night to his fellows, was overheard saying, "We are all mortal. That is our strength. We burn bright because we know the flame will end. You cannot frighten a fire with darkness." The words were translated, replayed, and spread among the alien researchers. Some dismissed them, but others found themselves haunted, unable to sleep, staring into the void of their own long lives, questioning what they had truly lived for. The experiments continued, but the results did not change. Humans faced pain, deprivation, and the certainty of death with a calm resolve that no model could predict. Some prayed, some laughed, some grew silent, but none begged. None surrendered their dignity. For every test designed to break them, the humans answered with defiance, unity, and an acceptance that unsettled their captors more than rebellion ever could. In the end, the aliens realized something that filled them with dread. They had expected weakness and found resilience. They had expected fear and found fearlessness. They had expected to see creatures clinging desperately to life, but instead they saw beings who treated death not as the final failure, but as another moment to choose meaning. The humans were fragile, yes, but in their fragility lay their strength. For they did not worship life as endless but as precious precisely because it ended. The chamber lights dimmed, and the human prisoners sat together in the dark, their voices low, their hearts steady. The aliens recorded every moment, but the data could not soothe the unease building in their minds. A question lingered, one that none dared speak aloud but all feared. What happens when such a species, unafraid of death, rises to stand among the stars? For if death cannot conquer them, what power possibly could? The first encounters where humanity's indifference to mortality became undeniable spread through the stars like wildfire. Entire councils of elder species convened emergency gatherings, trying to dissect how such a fragile race could so recklessly gamble with its existence. For them, death had always been the boundary no one dared cross willingly. But for humanity, it seemed merely a line in the sand, something to acknowledge but never fear. Alien scholars debated endlessly. Some insisted that humans were unstable, a genetic accident doomed to burn themselves out before their philosophy could spread. Others whispered that perhaps humans were dangerous precisely because they embraced what every other civilization dreaded. Fear of death had always been the leash that kept empires cautious. Without that leash, what restraint would there be? Reports flooded in from border skirmishes where humans fought not like soldiers hoping to survive, but like forces of nature. Alien commanders recalled seeing human squads push through hopeless odds, fighting until their last breath. Their logic was incomprehensible. Where others retreated to preserve lives, humans advanced, as though each fallen comrade only ignited greater fury. And even when defeat was certain, they did not beg for mercy or surrender. Instead, they chose to make their deaths meaningful, dragging enemies into the abyss with them. To alien eyes, it was insanity. To human eyes, it was loyalty, courage, and the simple recognition that life's value is defined by how it is spent, not how long it lasts. Whispers turned into rumors and rumors into fear. In the halls of the ancient Tishar Dominion, leaders argued in hushed tones. One asked, "What becomes of a galaxy where death no longer restrains ambition?" Another answered, "It becomes a galaxy ruled by humans." But not every species saw terror in humanity's defiance. Some saw liberation. The Carol, a younger race long enslaved by the Archid hegemony, began to study human philosophy. They spread human sayings across their underground networks. Better to live a single day free than 1,000 years in chains. These words, simple to humans, became weapons sharper than any blade in Carol hands. It was not just the enslaved who listened. Even among the dominant powers, there were voices quietly admiring humanity. A few alien thinkers saw that fear of death had stagnated their civilizations. In their obsession with preserving existence, they had stopped living fully. Where humans saw life as a flame meant to burn bright, aliens saw it as an ember to be guarded endlessly. That contrast began to unsettle the galaxy's balance. Military observers from the Zealth Collective compiled reports describing human naval engagements. They noted how human captains often risked their entire crews to achieve objectives other fleets would never dare attempt. In simulations, such actions were dismissed as illogical. But in practice, humans often succeeded precisely because their enemies could not fathom that anyone would embrace such risks. What looked like chaos was strategy born of fearlessness. The collective's archivists noted grimly, "Against humanity, probability becomes unreliable, for they do not weigh outcomes as we do. Where we calculate survival, they calculate meaning. This renders them unpredictable, and unpredictability is the most dangerous weapon in war." But humanity's defiance of death did not remain confined to battlefields. It seeped into diplomacy. In councils where ancient species demanded concessions under threat of annihilation, humans simply shrugged. A Terran ambassador once told the Vaelan tribunal, "Threaten us with extinction if you like. Death comes for all. What matters is what we do before it finds us." That single statement, broadcast across systems, sent shockwaves. For the Vaelan who measured their lives in millennia, extinction was unthinkable. For humans, it was simply the final page in a story worth telling. This attitude unnerved even allies. The Sarathi, humanity's trading partners, confessed privately that they could never understand how humans slept peacefully knowing their lives ended so swiftly. One Sarathi elder said, "You live as if each breath is enough. You die as if tomorrow were never owed to you. To us, this is unbearable. To you, it is freedom." And freedom was contagious. As human explorers ventured deeper into uncharted regions, colonists carried their worldview like a banner. They built settlements in hostile worlds where other races dared not tread, simply because the risk of death did not paralyze them. Where others saw danger, humans saw challenge. Where others saw limits, humans saw opportunity. Soon, colonies thrived in places thought uninhabitable, and alien observers realized humanity was expanding faster than fear could contain them. But expansion brought conflict. Inevitably, human settlers clashed with alien empires guarding their borders. In one infamous incident, the Kroth, a warlike species priding themselves on intimidation, confronted a human colony on the edge of disputed space. They issued threats, promising painful extinction unless humans surrendered their claim. Instead of cowering, the human governor transmitted a calm reply, "We all die. The question is whether we die kneeling or standing. The Croth expected compliance. What they received was resistance so unrelenting it rattled them to their core. Human militia fought until their ammunition ran dry, then fought with their bare hands. The Croth, who thrived on fear, found none in their enemy. In the end, the humans lost most of the colony, but they inflicted such devastating casualties that the Croth withdrew. And when the story spread, it was not told as a tale of defeat but of defiance. This defiance reshaped perception. Other species began to wonder. If humans could face annihilation without trembling, what could truly control them? And more dangerously, what might happen if others adopted their philosophy? Already seeds of rebellion were sprouting. The enslaved Carol rose in scattered uprisings, emboldened by human ideals. The Archid tried to crush them, but found that the fire of defiance had spread too deep. For every rebel killed, two more took their place. And though the Carol lacked humanity's numbers or technology, they had inherited humanity's most dangerous weapon, the willingness to die for freedom. In the heart of the galaxy, the great councils watched in dread. They realized humanity was not merely a new race. It was a contagion of thought. Death had always been the ultimate deterrent, the invisible chain binding civilizations. Humanity had broken that chain, and others were learning how to do the same. The tipping point came during the siege of Calther Prime. There, a coalition of three advanced empires attempted to force humanity into compliance by targeting a strategic Terran stronghold. Their fleets dwarfed the human defenders. Victory was mathematically certain, but the defenders did not flee. They held the line against impossible odds, sacrificing ship after ship to buy time. Human soldiers fought in the ruins of cities until there was nothing left but ash and silence. Yet in their sacrifice, they inflicted wounds so deep that the coalition's fleets limped home in disgrace. News of Calther Prime ignited the galaxy. Some races shuddered, whispering that humans were mad. Others cheered, declaring that humans had shown the way to live without fear. The balance of power shifted irreversibly. Human leaders did not celebrate. To them, the battle was tragedy, a price paid in blood. But to the galaxy, it was revelation. For the first time in millennia, death had lost its power to terrify. And those who had once mocked humanity now faced a chilling realization. A species that does not fear death cannot be conquered. Humanity had long since proven itself a contradiction to every galactic standard. But what came after the wars shook even their staunchest allies and fiercest enemies into silence. Where most species would retreat into mourning after a devastating campaign, humans carried scars like medals, telling stories of the fallen not as losses but as anchors of strength. In alien archives, this period was cataloged as the cycle of paradox, because nothing in the records aligned with expected behavior. Yet for humans, it was simply life, raw and unyielding. Peace did not soften them. Instead, it sharpened their contradictions. In rebuilding ruined colonies, they planted gardens on scorched ground, raising statues not of generals but of ordinary soldiers who had faced the abyss with defiance. When alien delegations visited, expecting to see despair, they found laughter echoing through ruined streets, children playing atop broken starships, families cooking meals in the shadows of collapsed towers. To others, this was insanity. To humans, it was defiance written into every breath. They didn't just survive. They thrived by staring at death and smiling back. It was during this fragile peace that the council convened again, demanding answers. How had humanity resisted annihilation? How could a species so mortal rise above devastation? Representatives from a dozen empires tried to dissect the human spirit into formulas and probabilities. But every interview, every analysis failed to provide a neat answer. When asked, humans themselves gave responses so varied it confounded the greatest thinkers. Because we had no choice. Because we refused. Because we wanted our children to know we tried. Some answers were simple, others profound, yet none fully explained the fire behind their resilience. The truth, whispered among human veterans, was simpler still. Death had no power over them. Where other civilizations cowered before mortality, humans had made peace with it, carrying it as a companion rather than an enemy. They had learned to see beauty in its shadow, meaning in its inevitability. Aliens could not understand how people could laugh at funerals, how soldiers wrote love letters knowing they would never be read, how explorers left their names carved into forgotten asteroids as if the act itself was victory. As humanity pushed deeper into uncharted space, their reputation transformed from reckless to legendary. New alliances formed, not out of pity but out of fear and admiration. Planets welcomed them not because humans were the strongest, but because they were the most unbreakable. Pirates whispered that raiding human convoys was suicide. Mercenaries demanded extra pay when assignments involved opposing human units. Even warlords hesitated, recalling tales of soldiers who fought long after their positions were doomed, turning last stands into eternal warnings. What truly cemented humanity's place among the stars was their willingness to walk where no one else dared. Black zones, regions written off as cursed or haunted, became human outposts. Where sensors failed and navigation collapsed, they pressed forward with grit and instinct. Alien captains who accompanied them often returned shaken, confessing they had felt terror even in the safety of their ships, while humans laughed and called it just another day. This laughter, echoing in the dark, unnerved the galaxy more than any weapon could. With each passing year, the myths grew. Stories of humans singing as they marched into hopeless battles. Legends of engineers repairing ships mid-combat while explosions tore around them. Tales of medics who refused to retreat, saving lives even as the enemy closed in. These accounts spread faster than fact, yet the truth was even more haunting, because every myth was rooted in reality. Humanity didn't need embellishment. Their reality was stranger and stronger than fiction. For many civilizations, the human relationship with death remained a philosophical puzzle. Entire academies were devoted to studying their psychology. One alien philosopher wrote, "Humans are not fearless. They feel fear deeper than we do, yet they walk forward anyway. That is the secret." This idea resonated even among those who despised them, forcing species to question their own values. If fragility could be strength, then perhaps immortality was not the blessing they thought it was. Perhaps mortality was the key to meaning. But the most terrifying revelation came not from human soldiers, but from their children. Generations born after the Great Wars carried the same fire, though they had never faced annihilation. They grew up with stories of sacrifice, with lullabies about bravery, with games that reenacted desperate battles. Even in peace, death was not hidden from them. It was taught as part of life, as natural as breathing. Aliens visiting Earth were horrified to see children laughing at tales of monsters and heroes who died in the end, yet the humans insisted. The end was what gave the story weight. By the time new threats emerged at the galactic edge, no one doubted humanity's role. They were no longer seen as a curious anomaly, but as a shield the galaxy desperately needed. When reports came of a shadow empire rising beyond known space, feeding on fear itself, the Council trembled. But humanity did not. Veterans volunteered before the call was even made. Colonists packed supplies before fleets were dispatched. And in the halls of the Council, a single human representative spoke with words that burned into every record. "We don't fear your enemy. We never have. If fear is their weapon, they will find none here." The campaign that followed etched humanity's defiance into eternity. Against an enemy that thrived on despair, humans became an immovable wall. Their laughter broke illusions. Their songs shattered fear. Every sacrifice became a weapon, every death a defiance. The Shadow Empire crumbled not because humanity was stronger, but because humanity was unbreakable. In the end, when the last human ship emerged from the dark, scarred but victorious, the galaxy understood a truth too deep to deny. Humans had never been defined by power or technology or numbers. They were defined by their acceptance of death, and by their refusal to let it dictate their lives. Where others saw an ending, humans saw a reason to begin. Where others froze in terror, humans found courage. In their mortality, they had discovered the ultimate strength, freedom. And it was that freedom which made the galaxy theirs. When the records were sealed and the tales told across stars, a single phrase was repeated in reverence and fear alike. Humanity does not fear death. The galaxy had seen empires rise and fall, each believing their dominion eternal until entropy claimed them. But humanity remained, not as conquerors in the traditional sense, but as a paradox of fragility and endurance that defied every model. Where other species measured strength in centuries of stability, humans thrived in chaos. They carried no illusions of permanence, and it was this awareness that gave them the audacity to challenge even the immutable. Long after the war with the Shadow Empire ended, civilizations expected humans to retreat, to recover in silence. Instead, they expanded, exploring frontiers that others labeled impossible. Space that bent reality, sectors where time collapsed, and regions so hostile even machines faltered. These became human territories. Their ships sailed into storms that shredded physics, returning battered but not broken. Every journey was marked by scars, but scars to humans were proof of survival, not weakness. Aliens watched with awe and unease as human philosophy spread, carried by traders, explorers, and wanderers. Unlike imperial edicts or religious doctrines, it was not forced but absorbed, for it resonated with something primal. Humanity taught that survival was not about escaping death, but about living fully despite it. Songs of sailors who never returned, poems written on battlefields, monuments raised not to rulers but to the fallen. These were the cultural exports of humanity, and they infected the galaxy with new ideas. Some empires resisted this influence, fearing it would unravel their carefully controlled societies. They outlawed human literature, banned human visitors, and erased records of their victories. Yet rebellion always followed. Populations whispered of humanity's defiance, and young dissidents carved human symbols into forbidden places, a silent testament to the truth that could not be killed. Even when suppressed, the spirit spread like fire in dry grass, unstoppable because it offered something no regime could promise: meaning. In time, the Council established a new order. Humanity was not merely a participant, they were a pillar. Their votes carried disproportionate weight, not by decree, but by necessity, for no one wanted to oppose them openly. Diplomats learned quickly that where other delegations played games of words and deception,